Welcome to Daily Review, your daily dose of literary exploration. We dive into books that spark curiosity and ignite growth. While our passion often leads us to nonfiction reads that empower and improve your life, no book is off limits.
From gripping thrillers to insightful memoirs and compelling fiction to historical accounts, we're here to share and discuss all the interesting reads we discover.
Tune in for your next great book idea. Thank you so much for tuning in to Daily Review. We truly appreciate you joining us for your daily dose of literary exploration.
Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to share these amazing books with you.
If you're enjoying what you hear, please consider taking a moment to subscribe, rate, like, and comment on any of the platforms you're listening from.
This really helps support our channel and allows us to get better and bring you even more great content.
If today's review sparked your interest and you're ready to dive into a copy of the book, please consider using the link in our description to make your purchase.
Not only does it make it easy for you to get your hands on the book, but it also directly supports our channel and the author, allowing us to keep bringing you more great content. Thanks again for being a part of the Daily Review community.
Now for today's deep dive. Have you ever looked around and felt like the world suddenly, almost, magically changed overnight?
Yeah, like one day a fashion trend is completely nowhere, right? And then the next day it's just everywhere.
Exactly. Or think about a city's crime rate. It's been stubbornly high for decades, and then suddenly it just plummets. Not gradually, but in this dramatic, almost unbelievable freefall.
It really does feel like some invisible lever was pulled and just boom, everything shifts.
It's that feeling, isn't it? That sense of dramatic, non-linear change. It really captivates us.
Definitely. We're so used to thinking of progress or even decline as this sort of slow, steady curve. But then, society throws us these incredible curveballs.
Makes you wonder if there's some kind of hidden logic to these really abrupt transformations. Is there something going on under the surface?
And that sense of a sudden, powerful shift is exactly the phenomenon we're diving into today. We're going to explore the groundbreaking concept from Malcolm Gladwell's really influential book, The Tipping Point.
Right. This deep dive is all about this fascinating idea that social changes, trends, behaviors, ideas, they spread through populations a lot like biological diseases.
Like epidemics.
Yeah, it's not just about what happens, but really how it happens, and crucially, why it can happen so incredibly quickly sometimes.
What's fascinating here, I think, is how this perspective just fundamentally reframes how we understand these big, large-scale social things.
Totally. We're not talking about simple cause and effect like A leads to B. It's more like a complex, interconnected system.
Where seemingly small initial actions can trigger these enormous, totally disproportionate ripple effects across society. It's kind of mind-bending.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to unpack the specific mechanisms, the rules, you could say, that seem to govern these social epidemics. We want to discover how those seemingly minor actions or maybe subtle environmental shifts can actually have those enormous disproportionate effects.
And we'll look at a bunch of diverse examples, right? Like from how crime rates in New York City suddenly dropped off a cliff,
to how children's television, something like Sesame Street or Blue's Clues, can powerfully shape young minds in ways we might not expect.
Yeah, we're going to try and understand what makes ideas, products, behaviors tip into widespread adoption.
Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start right at the beginning, the core concept. What is a tipping point?
Well, Gladwell defines it as the moment of critical mass, the threshold, the boiling point. It's really that precise instant.
That moment.
Yeah, that exact moment when an idea or a trend or some social behavior crosses this invisible line, this threshold.
And then seemingly out of nowhere, it just spreads like wildfire. It's not a slow buildup. It's more like an explosion.
Exactly. And the classic example, the one everyone talks about, is that dramatic drop in New York City crime back in the mid-1990s.
Oh, yeah, I remember the stories. If you think back to the late 80s, early 90s, the city was facing this, unprecedented crime crisis.
It's really bad. Neighborhoods like Brownsville, East New York, they were described as ghost towns after dusk, plagued by the drug trade, gang warfare.
Murders were soaring, right? Like thousands each year.
Right.
It felt like this pervasive, almost insurmountable problem.
It really did. And then the tip happened. It's actually astonishing. Between the early and late 1990s, so just 5 years.
Just 5 years.
Murders dropped by nearly 2/3, and overall, serious crimes fell by almost half. It was huge.
I remember reading about an inspector, Edward Masadri, who was on the ground in Brownsville. He said the rapid gunfire, which used to be common, just faded away.
Yeah, sidewalks filled up again, daily life started to return, and this wasn't, a gradual improvement over decades. It was sudden, a dramatic turnaround.
So the mystery becomes how? How can seemingly minor, almost imperceptible changes lead to such a drastic, sudden shift? What actually was that tipping point?
And what's fascinating here is how Gladwell uses epidemics as his core analogy to explain this. The central idea is pretty straightforward, actually.
Which is?
Ideas, products, messages, behaviors, they spread just like viruses do.
Huh, like a virus.
Yeah, think about something as simple, even kind of silly, as yawning.
Okay.
Just hearing the word yawning or seeing someone yawn, it's incredibly contagious,
Oh,
right?
so definitely. You saying it now makes me want to.
Exactly. It's a surprisingly powerful act, and it often spreads without any conscious effort. If you heard me say yawning a few more times, you might find yourself doing it. It just shows how quickly behaviors can transmit.
And this leads us to a pretty profound idea, doesn't it? This notion of geometric progression.
Right. We tend to think linearly. Cause and effect are usually seen as directly proportional. A leads to B in a predictable way.
But epidemics show us something different. They show how tiny, tiny changes can have massive, completely disproportionate effects over time.
It's like that classic thought experiment, folding a piece of paper 50 times.
Oh yeah, the paper folding thing.
Our intuition might guess it'd be, as thick as a phone book? Maybe a bit more?
Something like that.
But in reality, the height of that folded stack would actually approximate the distance to the sun.
Wow, okay, that's exponential, not linear at all.
Precisely. And that's the essence of nonlinear change. Tipping points mean changes don't always happen gradually. Sometimes they just explode.
Can you give another example of that?
Sure. Think about Jonathan Crane's sociological research on community role models. He looked at neighborhoods,
Okay.
and he found that when the number of high-status workers, professionals, managers, teachers, dropped below a certain threshold, about 5%.
Right, a critical level.
Yeah, problems like school dropout rates and teenage pregnancy didn't just gradually increase, they exploded.
Exploded. Like how much?
Well, for Black school children in his study, just a 2 percentage point drop in those high-status workers, say, from 5% to 3% more than doubled the dropout rate.
Doubled. Just in
Right?
that small shift.
Doubled. And teen pregnancy rates nearly doubled at that same threshold. It really illustrates how, at a certain critical point, a community can just suddenly unravel. Things get much worse very quickly.
Okay, so we've set the stage. We understand these abrupt shifts can happen. But how do they actually work? What are the underlying mechanisms driving this?
Right. That's where Gladwell introduces his 3 rules in epidemics. He calls them the crucial agents of change.
And those are,
The law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context.
okay, law of a few, stickiness factor, power of context. And I guess these aren't just like separate academic boxes, are they? Do they interact?
Oh, absolutely. They definitely build on each other, but they are distinct forces. Each one is critical if an idea or behavior is going to tip into widespread adoption.
Like different levers you need to pull.
Exactly. They're the levers that, when pulled correctly, can spark a social epidemic.
All right, let's take the first one then. The law of the few. This idea suggests that some people are just more important than others in spreading ideas.
Yeah, it's not that everyone's opinion or action carries the same weight. Certain individuals act as catalysts. They aren't just passive carriers. They actively drive the spread.
Is there a good example of this?
A really classic historical one Gladwell uses is the rides of Paul Revere versus William Dawes. This was April 18th, 1775.
The start of the American Revolution.
Right. Both men were sent out to warn about the British advance on Lexington and Concord. Revere, of course, went on his legendary midnight ride.
The British are coming.
Well, probably not exactly that, but yeah. He spread the word incredibly effectively, roused fierce resistance. His warning definitely tipped the alarm across the countryside.
Boss.
William Dawes rode an equally dangerous route, covered more ground arguably, and delivered his message too. But his ride had almost no impact outside the immediate towns he visited.
So same message, same night, different outcome. Why?
Exactly. It wasn't the message itself, Gladwell argues. It was about the kind of people involved. Revere was different. This brings us to the specific types of few who hold this extraordinary power.
Okay, so who are these key people?
Right. The first type Gladwell identifies are connectors. These are people who just know a vast number of other people. They're true social hubs, bridging lots of different communities and social circles.
Like social butterflies, but on a massive scale.
Sort of, but it's more about the breadth and diversity of their connections. Think about that concept of 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, the idea that we're all connected through just a few intermediaries.
Well, the psychologist Stanley Milgram did a famous experiment in the late 1960s to actually test this. He gave chain letters to people in Nebraska
Okay.
with instructions to send them on to a friend or acquaintance who they thought might get the packet closer to a specific target, a stockbroker living in Sharon, Massachusetts.
And what did he find? Did it work?
It did, mostly. Most letters reached the stockbroker in about 5 or 6 steps, which confirmed the small world idea. But here's where it gets really interesting and relevant to connectors.
What was that?
Many of the successful chains didn't just randomly find their way there. They passed through the same few people.
Really? The same individuals?
Yeah. For example, of the 24 letters that reached the stockbroker at his home, a whopping 16 were given to him by the same person, a clothing merchant Milgram called Mr. Jacobs.
Wow. So one guy was the funnel for 2/3 of the letters reaching the target's home address.
Exactly. It highlights this core insight. It's not just about how many people you know in general. It's that a very small percentage of people possess this extraordinary, almost innate ability to know people across many different worlds and bridge those worlds.
Those are the connectors, the linchpins, the hubs that allow ideas to spread far and wide.
Precisely. And it's not just about being sociable. Gladwell mentions something called the surname test. Basically, you take a list of random last names and count how many people you know with those names.
And the scores varied wildly.
Hugely. Even within similar groups, like college students, some people knew only a handful, while others knew over 100. It shows just how rare these true connectors are.
Got it. Do we have a real-world example of a connector?
Oh, a phenomenal one Gladwell profiles is Lois Weisberg, who was Chicago's Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for a long time. Her career path was just dizzying.
Like what?
She was involved in drama, newspaper publishing, public relations, law, park preservation, political campaigns. She even ran a flea market stand. She literally moved through dozens of different professional and social worlds.
Wow. And she connected people across these worlds.
Constantly. There's this amazing story about her meeting a young Arthur C. Clarke at a science fiction convention. Years later, he calls her from a payphone in Chicago, asking who he should meet while he's in town.
And what does she do?
She just casually says, "Oh, come on over." Then she picks up the phone and calls Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein, who just happen to be in Chicago too.
No way. Asimov and Heinlein, the giants of sci-fi.
Yep. They all came over and sat in her study, just chatting. Her friend said she had no snobbery. She found everyone interesting, whether it was a wedding photographer or a famous author. She just saw possibility in every connection.
That's incredible. So the implication here is that connectors provide these crucial weak ties, connections to people outside our immediate close circles.
Exactly. And those weak ties are what bridge different social worlds. This is how ideas, products, behaviors like, remember the resurgence of Hush Puppy shoes in the mid-90s?
Vaguely, yeah. They were suddenly cool again.
They went from near obscurity, selling maybe 30,000 pairs a year, mainly in small town stores, to a major fashion trend, selling hundreds of thousands. Gladwell suggests it wasn't a big ad campaign. It likely happened because a few connectors in trendy downtown Manhattan spots became enamored with them.
And through their huge, diverse networks, just sent the trend flying in 1,000 directions at once.
That's the idea. Connectors spread things far and wide.
Okay, so connect spread the message widely. Who's next in the law of the few?
Next up are Mavens. The word itself comes from Yiddish, and it means one who accumulates knowledge.
So these are the information specialists.
Yeah.
The experts.
Exactly, but it's more than just knowing stuff. Mavens are driven by a desire to help others by sharing what they know. They're not necessarily trying to persuade you, but they want to educate you, give you the inside scoop.
Like those people who always know the best deals or have researched every single product before buying.
Precisely. Gladwell uses the example of price vigilantes in supermarkets. Most of us consumers don't really check prices that closely or compare deals meticulously.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, me too. But a very small number of shoppers, the market mavens, do. They know when a sale isn't really a sale. And if a store tries to pull a fast one,
They'll notice.
they'll complain to management, and crucially, they'll tell all their friends. They sort of keep the marketplace honest through their knowledge and willingness to share it.
Is there a specific person who embodies this maven type?
Yeah, he profiles Mark Alpert, a University of Texas professor at the time. This guy is the epitome of a maven. He knows the exact temperature of a room, he runs upstairs for efficiency, and he can give you an exhaustive, incredibly detailed breakdown on how to get the best deal on literally anything.
Like cars, TVs?
Everything. Cable TV versus satellite dish, Leonard Maltin's movie guide accuracy, hotel rack rates versus corporate rates, the pros and cons of an Audi versus a Mercury Mystique.
Wow.
And he knows how to get the deal, like go to the fleet buyer at the car dealership on the 25th of the month. He's almost pathologically helpful. He'll spend ages sharing information, even if it only saves someone a tiny amount of money.
Why does he do it?
Glad just suggests it fulfills his emotional needs. He gets genuine satisfaction from solving other people's problems with information just for the sheer joy of sharing knowledge and helping out.
So the key distinction here, Mavens educate and help. They're information brokers. They provide the data.
Right, but they aren't necessarily persuaders. They'll tell you why something is a good deal, but they might not be the ones to actually push you over the line to buy it.
For an epidemic to really take off, you need the information, yes. But someone also needs to actually persuade people to change their behavior, to adopt the new idea or product.
Exactly, and that's where the third type comes in, salesmen.
Salesmen. Okay, this seems more straightforward. People who are good at convincing others.
Yes, but it's often more than just logical arguments. Salesmen are people with extraordinary persuasive abilities, often operating on a level beyond just words.
Can you give an example?
Gladwell talks about Tom Gow, a financial planner who was incredibly successful. He's charismatic, naturally exuberant, bounces with energy. He even uses a script book with like 50 pre-planned answers for common client objections.
So he's prepared, very logical.
His arguments are rational, yes, but his real persuasiveness, Gladwell argues, goes beyond the words themselves. It's something indefinable, an energy, an enthusiasm, a charm, a likability that just makes people want to agree with him. He literally bounces off his chair with happiness when talking to clients.
It's that infectious quality.
Exactly. And the power of persuasion often operates in these really subtle ways that we don't consciously pick up on.
Like what?
Consider a fascinating study from the 1984 Reagan-Mondale presidential campaign. Psychologists analyzed newscasters' facial expressions when talking about each candidate, but with the sound turned off.
Just watching their faces.
Yeah. And they found one prominent anchor, Peter Jennings, even though ABC's overall coverage was verbally considered somewhat anti-Reagan. Jennings himself exhibited a significant and noticeable bias in facial expression towards Reagan. More smiles, more positive expression.
And did that matter?
Apparently, yes. Viewers who regularly watched that network were significantly more likely to vote for Reagan than viewers of other networks, even if they couldn't articulate why. It suggests that subtle, nonverbal cue made a real difference. It's almost insidious because it's subconscious.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Are there other examples of this subtle persuasion?
Definitely. Another great experiment involved students listening to an editorial arguing for a tuition increase. One group was told to nod their heads up and down while listening, as if agreeing.
Okay.
Another group was told to shake their heads side to side, like disagreeing. And a third group kept their heads still.
And the nodding made a difference.
A huge difference. The students who physically nodded their heads were significantly more persuaded by the editorial advocating the tuition increase. Just the simple physical movement profoundly affected how they processed and accepted the information.
So nonverbal cues, even our own small movements, can be more powerful than the words themselves sometimes.
Often, yes. Persuasion works in ways we don't consciously appreciate. And this ties into the concept of emotional contagion.
Ah, emotional contagion, like how moods can spread.
Exactly. We unconsciously mimic the expressions, the movements, even the emotions of the people around us. It's a fundamental part of human interaction.
And some people are better at spreading their emotions than others.
Yes. Some people are just more expressive, more physiologically wired to be senders of emotion. Their feelings are literally more infectious. Think about someone with a really infectious laugh.
Yeah, you can't help but join in.
Right. And when we interact, especially with someone really expressive like a salesman, we often fall into what's called interactional synchrony.
Synchrony, like moving together.
Yeah, it's like a subconscious physical and conversational dance. Our microrhythms, head nods, speech patterns, gestures start to align. And a skilled salesman can often draw others into their rhythms, making them more receptive.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just about what they say, but this whole unconscious dance of persuasion.
Precisely. It's a combination of the message, the messenger's connectors, their knowledge mavens, and their ability to persuade, often non-verbally, Salesmen. That's the law of the few.
Okay, so we've covered the few who drive epidemics. But what about the message itself? That brings us to the second rule, right? The stickiness factor.
Exactly. The stickiness factor is all about the quality of the message. Is it memorable? Does it make an impact? And crucially, does it spur people to actually do something?
So it's not just about being contagious, like easily spread. It needs to, well, stick.
Right. It has to have retention and lead to behavior change. Think about traditional advertising. Often the strategy is just brute force repetition, the idea that you have to see an ad like 6 times for it to sink in.
Yeah, bombard the audience.
But Gladwell argues there are often smaller, subtler, easier ways to make a message stick, especially if you don't have a huge budget for repetition. Direct marketing provides some great insights here. They live and die by stickiness because they can actually measure success objectively. How many coupons get mailed back? How many people call the 800 number?
They need people to act.
Exactly. And Lester Wonderman, a real pioneer in direct marketing, faced this challenge with ads for the Columbia Record Club back in the day. His ads weren't getting people to act.
So what did he do?
He came up with this ingenious idea he called the treasure hunt. He put a little gold box symbol in the corner of their magazine order coupon.
Just a little graphic.
Yeah. Then he ran TV commercials that didn't just sell records, but revealed the secret of the gold box. They told viewers, look for this gold box in magazine ads. If you find it and write in the name of a free record you want, you'll get it.
Ah, so it connected the TV ad to the print ad and gave people a specific action.
Precisely. The gold box acted as a trigger. It made consumers actively look for the ads, it made the offer feel a bit special, and it created what Wonderman called an interactive advertising system.
Did it work?
The results were stunning. In 1977, before the gold box, none of Columbia's magazine ads were profitable. In 1978, with the gold box TV support, every single magazine ad became profitable.
Wow, just from adding that little element.
Yeah. It shows how a small, maybe even slightly cheesy tweak could make a message incredibly sticky, achieving what millions spent on traditional advertising couldn't. It made the message actionable.
And we see this principle elsewhere too, right? Like in public health.
Absolutely. Consider Howard Leventhal's experiments trying to get college seniors to get tetanus shots. His initial studies used booklets explaining the dangers of tetanus. Some used high fear messages, some low fear.
And the results?
Pretty dismal. Regardless of the fear level, only about 3% of the students actually went and got the shot, even though they said they were convinced of the risks. The message just didn't stick enough to cause action.
It wasn't translating into behavior.
Right. But then Leventhal tried adding the equivalent of Wonderman's gold box. To some of the booklets, he added a map of the campus, clearly marking the location of the health building. And he included specific information about the times when shots were available, even circling convenient times for the students.
And that made the difference.
A huge difference. The vaccination rate jumped from 3% to 28%.
Wow. But wait, these are seniors. They probably knew where the health center was already, didn't they?
Almost certainly. That's what makes it so fascinating. The map and times weren't providing crucial new information about location. What they did was shift the booklet from being just an abstract medical warning
To being a practical, personal piece of advice. It made the abstract threat concrete and provided a clear, easy path to action.
Exactly. It made the message memorable and actionable in a very specific way. It shows how tiny, practical tweaks in how information is presented can make a massive difference in whether it actually sticks and changes behavior.
Especially today, with what Gladwell calls the clutter problem. We're just bombarded with information. Getting any message to stick is incredibly hard.
It really is. Think about big companies spending millions on sponsorships, like Coke at the Olympics. Often recall rates for who sponsored what are surprisingly low. The messages just get lost in the noise.
Which highlights the critical need for careful stickiness engineering. And you mentioned children's television earlier. That's a place where this has been studied intensely.
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to children's attention, the traditional view, maybe back in the 60s and 70s, was that kids are passive viewers, that they're easily stimulated by flash and dash, Bright lights, quick cuts, loud noises, maybe cartoon violence.
The idea that you just need to keep things flashy to hold their attention.
Right. But pioneering researchers like Daniel Anderson and Elizabeth Lorch discovered something really profound and kind of counterintuitive back then.
What was that?
They found that kids actually watch television when they understand it, and they tend to look away when they get confused. They're not just passive sponges, they're surprisingly sophisticated strategic viewers.
How did they figure that out?
Through clever experiments. For instance, they re-edited Sesame Street episodes so the scenes were shown out of logical order. What happened? The kids stopped watching.
Because they couldn't follow it anymore.
Exactly. If they couldn't make sense of the narrative or the educational content, they disengaged. Another study showed kids who had toys available while watching still remembered just as much content as kids without toys because they strategically looked away from the screen during parts they found uninformative or confusing and looked back when important stuff was happening.
So they're actively processing, not just zoning out.
Right. And Ed Palmer, who was the head of research for Sesame Street in its crucial early years, really leaned into this. He developed a distractor device, basically, showing the program on one monitor and a slideshow on another, then meticulously tracking children's eye movements second by second.
To see exactly what held their attention and what didn't.
Precisely. And they learned fascinating things. Kids hated segments like The Man from Alphabet, which relied on puns they didn't get. They learned segments should be short, optimally around 3 minutes.
What else?
They found kids disliked contentious adult discussions. The creators might have thought conflict was exciting, but the kids just found it confusing and tuned out.
Interesting.
And sometimes, even popular characters could interfere with stickiness. There was a segment called Oscar's Blending, designed to teach kids how to blend letter sounds. But Oscar the Grouch's antics popping out of his can, making faces, were so engaging
that the kids focused entirely on Oscar and completely missed the blending lesson.
Yeah.
Oscar was sticky, but the educational content wasn't.
Exactly. It shows how careful you have to be. You can have the best educational goals, but if the presentation isn't sticky in the right way, the message gets lost.
This feels like it leads naturally into Blue's Clues. That show seemed very different from Sesame Street.
It was deliberately different. It was created by Nickelodeon producers Todd Kessler and Tracy Santamero, who deeply admired Sesame Street, but wanted to improve on its magazine format. Lots of short, unrelated segments.
So what did Blue's Clues do differently to be sticky?
Several key things. First, each half-hour episode has a single continuous storyline. It has a very distinct visual style, flat 2D feel, almost like a picture book. The pace is very deliberate, slower than Sesame Street.
And those pauses.
Ah, yes, the excruciatingly long pauses, as Gladwell calls them. After the host, Steve, asks the audience a question, which way should we go? There's this long silence.
Why?
To give preschoolers who process language more slowly actual time to think and shout out the answer. It makes the show interactive in a very real way for them. Steve also talks directly to the camera and plays dumb sometimes, needing the audience's help.
It empowers the kids.
Exactly. And the show's testing protocol was and is incredibly rigorous. Unlike Sesame Street, which tested maybe a third of its episodes, usually after completion, Blue's Clues tests every single episode multiple times before it ever airs.
They really fine-tune the stickiness.
Massively. And they discovered something crucial about repetition. Kids watch Blue's Clues episodes over and over, sometimes 10, 14 times.
Does that get boring for them?
You'd think so, but no. Their attention and, importantly, their comprehension actually increase with repeated viewings. It's sometimes called the James Earl Jones effect.
Why?
Because adults might rewatch a favorite movie for nostalgia or new details, but for preschoolers, repetition is fundamental to understanding and mastery. They love the predictability, the feeling of knowing what's coming, the affirmation of helping Steve figure things out. It builds confidence.
That's fascinating. It flips the idea that kids always need novelty.
It does for that age group. And the failures are just as instructive. Gladwell recounts a Sesame Street episode that tested poorly. The premise was Big Bird wanting a new real name, like Roy, instead of just a description, Big Bird.
Seems like a reasonable idea for a story.
It was funny, it was conceptual, it dealt with identity and emotion, but preschoolers bombed the comprehension tests. Why?
Why?
Because its core premise violated something called the principle of mutual exclusivity. Young children really struggle with the idea that one object can have two different names simultaneously.
So if he's Big Bird, he can't also be Roy.
To a preschooler, yeah. If you call him Roy, he must be a different kind of animal altogether. That cognitive hurdle, that confusion, made the entire episode unsticky. They couldn't get past the premise to understand the story.
Wow. That's incredibly subtle.
It is. And Blue's Clues mastered this. They carefully layer the clues Steve finds, usually making the first one easy, the second a bit harder, the third harder still.
To build confidence and engagement.
Exactly. It draws viewers deeper into the narrative and allows for deeper mastery and participation with each repetition. Research by Alice Wilder showed that even tiny changes, like switching the order of two clues, maybe ice and waddle for a penguin puzzle, could make a significant difference in how engaged kids were and how well they understood.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, stickiness isn't just about being loud or flashy. It's about understanding the audience's psychology, their cognitive limits, how they learn, and structuring the message in a way that resonates and makes sense to them.
Precisely. It's about finding those small, crucial adjustments that make information understandable, memorable, and actionable.
Okay, that's the stickiness factor. So we have the law of the few, the right people, and the stickiness factor, the right message. What's the third rule?
The third rule is the power of context. This idea is that epidemics are incredibly sensitive to the conditions and circumstances of the immediate environment in which they operate.
So the situation matters a lot.
Hugely.
Yeah.
Even small, subtle, sometimes unexpected factors in the environment can dramatically affect our behavior and therefore how epidemics spread.
What's a classic example of context-driving behavior?
A really famous, though often misunderstood example is the Kitty Genovese murder back in 1964 in New York. She was attacked over a period of time, and the initial report said 38 neighbors saw or heard it happen but did nothing, didn't even call the police.
Yeah, that story became a symbol of urban apathy, right? Big city indifference.
That was the initial conclusion, yes. Urban anonymity, alienation, people not caring about each other. But psychologists Bibb Latané and John Darley did follow-up research on what they called the bystander problem.
And they found something else.
They found the key factor wasn't necessarily apathy, it was the number of witnesses. The more people who are present during an emergency,
The less likely any single one of them is to help.
exactly, it's called diffusion of responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else will call the police, someone else will intervene. So paradoxically, the presence of many witnesses made inaction more likely. It was a subtle but powerful contextual cue.
So the context, the number of other people around, changed individual behavior.
Profoundly. And this idea that context matters so deeply was absolutely central to understanding that turnaround of the New York City crime epidemic we talked about earlier.
Right, the sudden drop in the 90s. How did context play a role there?
Well, remember how bad things were in the 80s? The subway system was often seen as the symbol of the city's chaos. It was filthy, covered in graffiti, trains were constantly delayed, fare beating was rampant, and felonies on the subway were soaring.
But felt out of control.
Totally. Now, the prevailing view of crime at the time often focused on the criminal. The idea was that criminals are a certain personality type, psychologically stunted, maybe genetically predisposed, morally failed individuals who are largely insensitive to social norms or their environment.
They're just bad apples.
Sort of. But the power of context perspective, particularly as embodied in the broken windows theory by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, argues almost the opposite.
What's the broken windows theory?
The core idea is that crime is often an inevitable result of disorder. If a window in a building is broken and left unrepaired, it sends a signal.
Let's signal that.
That no one cares, that no one is in charge. And that signal invites more windows to be broken. Gradually, the sense of anarchy and disorder spreads, and this can invite more serious crime.
So minor problems, if left unchecked, can create an environment where major crime flourishes.
Exactly. In a city, things like graffiti, public drunkenness, aggressive panhandling, turnstile jumping, these are all broken windows. They're invitations, signals that norms have broken down, which can make more serious crime seem more permissible or less risky.
And this theory was actually applied in New York.
It was, quite famously. First, David Gunn, who took over the transit authority in the mid-'80s, became absolutely obsessed with cleaning graffiti off the subway cars. He saw it as a symbol of decay that had to be erased.
Okay, cleaning up the visual disorder.
Then, William Bratton became chief of the transit police in 1990. He decided to crack down hard on fare beating. Why? Because he saw it as a critical broken window. Letting people get away with that minor offense invited a sense of impunity that could lead to more serious crimes underground.
But arresting people for a $1.25 fare evasion seems like a lot of effort for police.
It was, and initially, officers weren't keen. Processing an arrest took almost a whole day. So Bratton innovated. He retrofitted city buses into rolling station houses that could process arrests right there at the station entrance in about an hour.
Making it efficient to enforce the small stuff.
Right. And then came the bonus, when they started arresting fare beaters and running their names.
They found a lot of them had outstanding warrants for more serious crimes.
Or were carrying weapons.
Exactly. About 1 in 7 arrested had an outstanding warrant, and 1 in 20 was carrying a weapon. Cracking down on the broken window of fare beating turned into a bonanza, as Bratton called it, for catching more serious offenders.
And the crime rate in the subways and later the city dropped dramatically.
It did. And this really challenged that old idea that criminals are just inherent personality types. Instead, it suggested that maybe criminals are actually acutely sensitive to their environment, that subtle cues about whether rules are enforced, whether anyone cares, make a huge difference in their behavior.
So changing the context changed the behavior. Little things mattered, and they mattered enormously.
Precisely. And this sensitivity to context isn't just about criminals. It seems to be a fundamental aspect of human psychology, often more powerful than our inherent personality traits. Are there psychological experiments that show this?
Oh, absolutely. The Stanford prison experiment is a chilling example. Phillips and Bardo took normal, healthy college students and randomly assigned them roles as guards or prisoners in a mock prison setup in the basement of the psychology department.
And they just became those roles.
Frighteningly quickly. Within days, students assigned as guards started exhibiting authoritarian, even abusive behaviors, while those assigned as prisoners became passive, stressed, and submissive. These were psychologically healthy individuals. Their behavior was overwhelmed by the power of the situation, the context of the prison environment.
The experiment had to be stopped early.
Yeah, after only 6 days, because things were getting out of hand. It powerfully demonstrated how situational forces can override individual personality.
Are there other examples?
Sure. Decades earlier, studies by Hartshorn and May looked at honesty in school children. They gave kids opportunities to cheat in various situations on tests and games, etc.
And they found some kids were honest and some were cheaters.
Not really. What they found was that honesty wasn't a unified character trait. A child might cheat on a math test but be perfectly honest in an athletic contest, or vice versa. Behavior depended heavily on the specific situation, not just on whether the child was inherently honest or dishonest.
So context again. We behave differently in different situations.
We do, and yet we
Yeah.
constantly tend to overlook the power of the situation when explaining other people's behavior. Psychologists have a name for this.
What's that?
It's called the fundamental attribution error, or FAE. It's our deep-seated tendency to overestimate the importance of fundamental character traits and underestimate the importance of the situation or context.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If someone cuts us off in traffic, our first instinct is often, that guy's a jerk, attributing it to character. We're less likely to think, maybe he's rushing to the hospital, considering the situation.
We blame the person, not the circumstance.
Exactly. We see basketball players perform worse when the lighting in the gym is bad, and we might subconsciously think they're just having an off night or aren't as skilled rather than fully accounting for the poor visibility. Gladwell even points to the birth order myth, the common belief that oldest children are bossy, youngest are rebellious, etc.
Yeah, people talk about that all the time.
But research suggests those traits often only manifest within the family context. Outside the family, birth order has very little predictive power for personality. It's another example of us attributing behavior to fixed character traits, ignoring the specific situation, in this case, family dynamics.
This FAE seems really pervasive.
It is. And one more study really drives home how powerful context can be, even for people we'd expect to be guided by strong principles. The Good Samaritan study.
What happened there?
Researchers Darlene Batson recruited seminary students, people studying to be priests or ministers. They were asked to prepare a short talk. Some were assigned the parable of the Good Samaritan as their topic.
Okay, so they're literally thinking about helping others.
Right. Then each student was told to go to another building to give their talk. Some were told they were late and needed to hurry. Others were told they had plenty of time.
On the way.
On the way, they passed a man slumped in an alleyway, clearly in distress, coughing and groaning. The researchers watched to see who would stop to help.
And the results? Did thinking about the Good Samaritan make them more likely to help?
Amazingly, no. The topic of their talk had no significant effect on their behavior. The only thing that mattered significantly was whether they were in a hurry.
Serious?
Seriously, of those who were not in a hurry, a large majority stopped to help. Of those who were told they were late, only 10% stopped. Being in a hurry, a purely situational factor, completely overwhelmed their personality, their religious training, even the fact they were about to preach about helping someone in need.
Wow, that's humbling. It really suggests we are exquisitely sensitive to our context.
We really are. And the hopeful implication of the broken windows theory in these studies is that if bad environments can make people behave badly, then maybe better environments can make people behave better. A cleaner street, a less hurried pace. These subtle contextual changes can actually influence us for the better.
So context isn't just about the physical environment, like clean streets, but also the social environment, right? The groups we're in.
Absolutely. And this leads to another fascinating contextual factor Gladwell discusses, the rule of 150.
The rule of 150, what's that about?
It comes from the work of British anthropologist Robin Dunbar. He was looking at the relationship between primate brain size, specifically the size of the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, and the typical size of the social groups those primates live in.
And he found a correlation.
A strong correlation. Bigger neocortex, bigger group size, so he plugged the size of the human neocortex into his equation.
And it predicted a maximum group size for humans.
Exactly. It predicted a cognitive limit on the number of people we can maintain stable social relationships with. Relationships where you know who each person is and you know how they relate to every other person in the group.
And that number is?
Around 150. Dunbar argues that this is roughly the maximum number of individuals with whom we can have a genuinely social relationship. Beyond that number, things start to break down. We just can't keep track anymore.
Is there evidence for this number 150 in human societies?
Quite a bit, actually. The average size of hunter-gatherer villages across various cultures comes out to around 148.4. Modern military forces often find that functional fighting units work best below about 200, but informal social control really breaks down above 150.
Any other examples?
Yeah, the Hutterites, a communal religious group, have a long-standing tradition. Whenever their colonies approach 150 people, they deliberately split them in two. They say beyond that number, people become strangers, and the informal peer pressure that governs their community stops working effectively.
So this number 150 seems to be a kind of critical threshold for human social groups. It's a contextual limit.
It appears to be, and this has huge implications for organizations. Gladwell highlights Gore Associates, the company that makes Gore-Tex fabric, Glide dental floss, and other high-tech products.
They're a big company, right? Multi-billion dollars.
Huge, but they deliberately maintain a small company ethos. They have very little formal hierarchy, no real titles, no managers in the traditional sense. People have sponsors or mentors. There are no organization charts. Decisions are often made collectively. Salaries are partly determined by peer review.
How do they manage that in such a large company? It sounds potentially chaotic.
Their secret sauce, Gladwell argues, is strict adherence to the rule of 150. As soon as a plant or office location starts approaching 150 employees, they build another one, often right next door, and split the group.
They intentionally keep the unit small.
Yes. To ensure that personal loyalties, direct contacts, and informal peer pressure remain the primary means of organization and control. They believe that intimacy and connection are crucial for innovation and efficiency, and that disappears in overly large groups.
That makes sense. It keeps things manageable on a human scale.
And it ties into another concept called transactive memory from psychologist Daniel Wegner.
Transactive memory. What's that?
It's the idea that in close, long-term relationships or groups like couples, families, or established work teams, people implicitly develop a shared memory system. Individuals specialize in remembering certain kinds of information.
Like one person in a couple remembers all the social dates. The other remembers how to fix the computer.
Exactly. You don't both need to remember everything perfectly because you know who does remember it. It's like a joint cognitive system.
And how does that apply to Gore?
At Gore, because they keep their unit small and people work together for a long time, they develop incredibly effective transactive memory systems. Everyone knows who the expert is on a particular polymer or who has the best contacts in sales for a certain region.
So it creates a sort of global memory system within the company.
Precisely. It makes the company incredibly efficient. It fosters cooperation, speeds up problem solving, and allows seamless sharing of expertise across different functions, from R&D right through to sales, all because they respect that contextual limit of 150.
So the paradox of the epidemic emerges here again, doesn't it? To create one big contagious movement.
You often need to create many small movements first. You need to leverage the power of small, tightly knit groups where new ideas or behaviors can be nurtured and spread effectively before they hit the wider world.
Like Rebecca Wells's novel, Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood. That book really took off.
It did, and Gladwell argues it tipped not just because the book itself might have been sticky, or because Wells was apparently a charismatic salesman who acted out her readings.
What was the context?
A critical part of the context was its explosion within Northern California's really strong book group culture. Women formed their own Yaya sisterhood groups around the book.
So the book became a shared social experience within these small groups.
Exactly. That deepened its stickiness, made it more meaningful, and fueled its spread. The big epidemic was really thousands of small epidemics happening concurrently within these groups.
It reminds me of what you said about John Wesley and Methodism earlier.
Yes. Wesley wasn't necessarily the single most charismatic preacher of his time. His real genius was organizational. He would preach to large crowds, sure, but then he would organize the most enthusiastic converts into small classes, usually about a dozen people.
Why?
These small groups provided community, mutual support, and a structure for practicing and reinforcing the new beliefs and behaviors. Wesley understood that lasting change required building these small, intense communities. He was a connector, but primarily to groups, not just individuals. He knew you needed that supportive context for an idea to truly take root and spread.
So what does this all mean when we put the law of the few, stickiness, and context together? Maybe we can look at some specific case studies to see how these three rules interact in the real world.
Definitely. Let's take Airwalk, the shoe company. They started out primarily as a skateboard shoe company, kind of a cult following, doing maybe $13 million a year.
Pretty niche.
Very niche. But then, in the mid-90s, after a reorganization, expansion into new categories, some clever grassroots campaigns, and crucially, hiring a new ad agency called Lambesis, their sales just exploded.
How much?
They went from around $16 million to $175 million in just 3 years. They became one of the coolest brands among teenagers globally. That's a massive tip.
So how did they do it? How did they go from niche skate shoe to mainstream cool?
This really exemplifies that challenge Jeffrey Moore talks about in his book, Crossing the Chasm.
Crossing the chasm. What's the chasm?
It's the gap between the innovators and early adopters, the risk takers, the trendsetters who jump on new things first, and the much larger early majority, the beginning of the mainstream market. Many cool niche products die because they can't cross that chasm.
So Airwalk needed to take something cool within the skateboarding subculture and make it appeal to regular teenagers, even those who didn't skate.
Exactly. And that requires translation. You need someone to take the raw, edgy ideas from the innovators and make them understandable, appealing, and safe enough for the mainstream.
And this is where the law of the few comes back in. Connectors, mavens, salesmen as translators.
Precisely. They take ideas from specialized worlds, whether it's software, tax law, or street fashion, and reframe them, repackage them, make them accessible to a wider audience.
Like the examples you gave earlier. Mark Alpert translating tech, Tom Gao translating finance.
Right. And for Airwalk, their ad agency Lambesis had a key person, Dee Dee Gordon, who acted as their maven for cool. Her job was basically to figure out what the real innovators were doing, thinking, and wearing.
And who were these innovators, according to her?
Often they were the outcasts, the activists, kids interested in obscure or edgy things, maybe bigger picture issues like germ warfare or obscure music, not the mainstream trend followers.
So she'd identify these cutting-edge trends, and then...
And then she or the agency would tweak them, translate them, make them more palatable.
Can you give an example of tweaking?
Sure. Gordon apparently saw the wife-beater undershirt look becoming popular among some edgy groups, maybe borrowing from Mexican gangster style. The agency translated that into an ad featuring a Converse shower sandal, same vibe, less extreme product.
Okay, softening the edge.
Or she observed bike messengers using duct tape on their jeans. That got translated into ads featuring Velcro closures on shoes. Barbie t-shirts, worn ironically by some innovators, became less extreme graphic tees. It's about capturing the essence, but making it broadly appealing.
And Airwalk's ads reflected this.
Totally. Their ad campaigns brilliantly piggybacked on emerging, slightly alternative trends, maybe spoofing kung fu movies, referencing beat poetry, playing off the X-Files phenomenon. They planted these subtle cultural cues everywhere.
Providing the critical translation needed to take edgy innovator trends and make them cool but accessible to the mainstream early majority.
Exactly. They translated the niche into the mainstream without losing the original coolness, which is a very tricky balancing act. And this whole process of translation and potential distortion reminds me of the psychology of rumor, which Gordon Allport studied extensively back in the 1940s.
How does rumor relate to this?
Allport described a classic case from 1945 in Maine. A well-dressed Chinese teacher on vacation politely asked a local resident for directions while holding a guidebook, a perfectly innocent encounter.
Okay, but it became a rumor.
Oh yeah. Within hours, the story circulating in town was that a Japanese spy had been seen taking pictures of strategic installations.
Wow, how did it get distorted so quickly and completely?
Allport identified three key processes that happen as a rumor travels from person to person: leveling, sharpening, and assimilation.
Leveling.
Leveling is where details essential for the true meaning get dropped. In the main case, the man's courtesy, his Chinese nationality versus Japanese, the fact it was a guidebook, not a camera, all these got leveled out, omitted.
Okay, details disappear. What's sharpening?
Sharpening is where the remaining details get emphasized, exaggerated, or made more specific. The man became a spy. His race became Japanese, the enemy at the time. The guidebook became a camera. The details that fit the emerging narrative get sharpened.
And assimilation.
Assimilation is where the story gets changed further to make more sense to the people spreading it, to fit into their existing beliefs and prejudices, their frames of reference. In wartime Maine, the idea of a Japanese spy felt more plausible or understandable than a lost Chinese tourist, so the story assimilated to fit that context.
So, leveling, sharpening, assimilation. The rumor gets simplified, exaggerated, and reshaped to fit the audience's expectations.
Exactly. And this is fundamentally a process of translation, albeit often leading to distortion. Just as rumors get translated as they spread, so too do fashion trends, ideas, and behaviors. They get adapted and modified by connectors, mavens, and salesmen to fit new contexts and audiences.
Allowing them to spread beyond their original niche.
Right. Think about something like the Baltimore Needle Exchange program Gladwell mentions. For health information from the medical community to actually reach and influence isolated drug users, it needed to be translated.
But people who understood both worlds.
Yeah, maybe by outreach workers or even super exchangers within the drug community itself, people who acted as connectors and could translate the official health messages into language and forms that were credible and understandable to their peers. Translation is key to crossing social boundaries.
Let's shift gears now to another much darker case study that illustrates these principles. Suicide and smoking. Starting with the Micronesian suicide epidemic. That sounds horrifying.
It was, and is, deeply tragic. Gladwell describes how, in the early 1960s, suicide was virtually unknown across the islands of Micronesia. But starting in the 70s and peaking in the 80s, the suicide rate among young males just skyrocketed.
How high did it get?
It became the highest in the world for that demographic, reaching rates like 160 per 100,000 compared to maybe 22 per 100,000 for young American males at the time. It became disturbingly commonplace.
And what triggered these suicides? Were they related to major crises?
Shockingly often, no. The triggers could be incredibly small incidents, things that seem trivial from an outside perspective. A father yelling at his son, not getting the right graduation gown, a mild rebuke from an older brother, a fight with a girlfriend. Wounded pride seemed to be a key factor.
And it became contagious,
Yeah.
ritualized.
Very much so. They developed this unwritten but very specific protocol that almost all the suicides followed. It was almost always young males, late teens or early 20s, usually followed a domestic dispute or perceived slight, often involved alcohol. They'd leave notes about wounded pride, typically happened on a weekend night.
And the method.
Almost always a specific form of hanging, often from a low beam or rafter, where the victim would lean forward, cutting off blood flow to the brain, rather than the more typical suspension hanging. It became a known, almost scripted way to die.
How did it spread? How did it become contagious?
Through various means. Stories, popular songs were written about suicides, graffiti memorialized victims. Tragically, it even spread through imitative play, where children as young as 8 or 10 were found trying out the hanging method, frighteningly trivializing its lethality. It became part of the cultural air.
That's chilling. Does research support this idea of suicide contagion?
Yes, quite strongly. Sociologist David Phillips conducted studies showing clear links. He found that front-page newspaper stories about a suicide were often followed by measurable jumps in the suicide rate, both in the area where the story ran and sometimes nationally.
Like copycat suicide.
Essentially, yes. Marilyn Monroe's highly publicized death in 1962, for instance, was followed by a significant, though temporary, increase of about 12% in the U.S. national suicide rate. Phillips even found correlations between publicized suicides and subsequent increases in single-car traffic fatalities that looked suspicious, suggesting some people might use car crashes as a form of disguised suicide influenced by the earlier news.
So the contagion might even be subconscious.
It often seems to be. Gladwell compares it to seeing someone else jaywalk suddenly. You feel slightly more inclined to do it yourself. It's like the publicized suicide gives a kind of permission for others who might be vulnerable to engage in a previously unthinkable deviant act. Suicide, in that Micronesian context, became a readily available script, a preformed meaning, a crude language for expressing distress.
He mentions a specific case, R's suicide on Ebi Island.
Yes, in 1966, R was a charismatic young man from a prominent family. His suicide, framed as romantic and tragic, seemed to set off a cluster of subsequent suicides among his peers and admirers over the following years. Some later victims even reported dreaming of R, calling them to kill themselves. It shows how a single influential event, amplified by the law of the few, R's charisma and context, the cultural script, could tip an epidemic.
Okay, so suicide can be contagious. How does this relate to teenage smoking? Is that also viewed as an epidemic?
Gladwell argues strongly that it should be. And importantly, that traditional approaches to stopping it often fail because they don't understand the epidemic nature of it.
Like just telling teens smoking is bad for you.
Exactly. Most anti-smoking campaigns focus on educating teens about the long-term health risks, cancer, heart disease. But studies show teens often overestimate these risks already. And telling defiant adolescents not to do something can sometimes backfire, making it seem more attractive.
The forbidden fruit effect.
Right. And the reality is, despite decades of health warnings, teen smoking actually increased dramatically between 1991 and 1997, a 32% jump among high schoolers during that period. So the old approaches weren't working.
So how does the tipping point framework apply? Let's start with the law of the few. Are there specific types of kids who start smoking trends?
Absolutely. Think back to who the first smokers usually are in any peer group. It's rarely the cautious, studious kids. It's often the cool ones, the Billy G.S., the Pam P.S., the Maggie, the au pairs Gladwell uses as archetypes.
The trendsetters, the risk takers.
Exactly. These kids act as the salesmen for smoking. But here's the crucial point. Gladwell argues they don't make smoking cool. They smoke because they already are cool.
So smoking is just an accessory to their existing coolness.
Precisely. The personality traits often associated with these early experimenters, things like defiance, impulsiveness, risk-taking, sexual precocity, maybe even a certain kind of perceived honesty or indifference to adult opinion. These are the very traits that make them compelling and influential figures to other adolescents. Smoking becomes the ultimate expression of that attractive, rebellious coolness.
So trying to directly counter the coolness of smoking is hard, because it's tied to the coolness of the smokers.
It's very difficult. That influence, driven by the law of the few, is incredibly powerful during adolescence.
Okay, so the cool kids act as salesmen. What about the stickiness factor in smoking? Is nicotine inherently sticky?
It's more complicated than you might think. The initial experience of smoking is often unpleasant, coughing, dizziness. But Gladwell points out that many people who go on to become regular smokers report getting a pleasurable buzz or high even from their first few cigarettes.
More so than people who don't get hooked.
Significantly more so. One study found 78% of eventual heavy smokers recalled that early positive sensation, compared to only 25% of never-again smokers. So there seems to be an initial biological reinforcement for some.
But not everyone who tries cigarettes gets addicted, right?
Not at all. Addiction is far from universal. Only about a third of people who experiment with cigarettes go on to become regular dependent smokers. And there are millions of people known as chippers.
Chippers.
Yeah, people who smoke cigarettes regularly, maybe for years, but never become addicted. They typically smoke 5 or fewer cigarettes per day, often only in specific situations like socializing, and don't experience withdrawal if they stop.
So addiction isn't inevitable, even with regular use for some people.
It seems not. This suggests there might be significant individual differences, potentially genetic, in how susceptible people are to nicotine's addictive properties. Mouse studies show genetic factors strongly influence tolerance and the perceived pleasure derived from nicotine.
So stickiness varies. Some people were just more biologically prone to finding nicotine sticky and addictive than others.
That seems to be the case. Which leads to thinking about potential intervention points that target stickiness, rather than just trying to stop experimentation altogether.
What would those sticky intervention points look like?
Well, one critical vulnerability seems to be depression. There's a strong link between depression and smoking initiation and difficulty quitting. So one tipping point could be treating the underlying depression.
How would that work?
Interestingly, the antidepressant drug bupropion, marketed as Wellbutrin, was serendipitously discovered to significantly reduce people's desire to smoke, even in non-depressed smokers. It got reapproved as Zyben, an anti-smoking medication. It seems to target some of the same brain pathways involved in nicotine reward.
So by addressing a related vulnerability, depression, you can make smoking less sticky.
Potentially, yes. Another, perhaps more radical idea focuses directly on the nicotine itself. Leading nicotine experts like Neil Benowitz and Jack Henningfield proposed years ago that regulators could mandate a gradual reduction of nicotine levels in all cigarettes.
Down to a level below the threshold for addiction.
Exactly. Down to a point where cigarettes would still deliver some immediate sensory effects, but not enough nicotine to reliably hook most users, especially adolescents whose brains are still developing. Maybe a maximum of 5 milligram total nicotine absorbed over a 24-hour period, which is roughly the chipper level.
What's the rationale? Teens would still try smoking.
The rationale accepts that teens will likely still experiment. Why? Because of contagion from cool peers, law of the few, and the powerful context of adolescence, rebellion, risk-taking. You probably can't stop experimentation entirely.
But if the cigarettes themselves aren't addictive,
Then the habit wouldn't become sticky. Experimentation wouldn't reliably lead to lifelong addiction. Smoking, as Benowitz and Henningfield put it, might become less like the flu and more like the common cold. Easily caught, but easily defeated.
that's a powerful analogy. It requires rethinking experimentation itself.
It does. We often treat any experimentation with risky things as inherently bad, but experimentation is normal, especially for adolescents. Look at cocaine. Many try it, but only a tiny fraction, maybe 0.9%, become regular users. Most people experiment and move on.
So the goal shouldn't necessarily be zero experimentation, but ensuring experimentation doesn't lead to devastating or irreversible consequences.
Precisely. The tragedy of the Micronesian suicide epidemic was partly that young boys were experimenting with an act that was instantly irreversible. But smoking can potentially be made less sticky, less addictive. Its consequences can be altered by changing the product itself.
So wrapping this all up, after diving into the law of the few, the stickiness factor, and the power of context, what's the big takeaway?
Well, one of the most hopeful and maybe counterintuitive messages from the tipping point concept is that sometimes what Gladwell calls Band-Aid solutions can actually be the best kind of solutions.
Band-Aid solutions, like quick fixes, we usually think those are bad, right?
Yeah.
We want deep systemic change.
We do have that instinct, don't we? We feel true answers to big problems have to be comprehensive, involve slow, steady, massive effort. We instinctively disdain the quick fix.
But Gladwell argues.
He argues that a Band-Aid, used correctly, is actually great. It's effective for its specific purpose, it's inexpensive, and it's convenient. And often, the most effective interventions for social epidemics are like Band-Aids. Simple, targeted actions focused on a specific leverage point.
Like adding a map to the tetanus shot pamphlet.
Or obsessively cleaning graffiti in the subway.
Or maybe, hypothetically, reducing nicotine levels in cigarettes.
Exactly. These aren't massive, multi-billion-dollar social programs. They're focused, relatively inexpensive interventions that target a key element, stickiness or context, or the few, and can produce dramatic results.
It requires reframing our intuition, doesn't it? Our minds struggle with that kind of dramatic, exponential change, like the paper folding to the sun example.
We really do. We have these built-in limits to our cognitive categories, our social connections, like the rule of 150. Human communication and behavior are often messy, weird, and counterintuitive.
Like preschoolers getting confused by a big bird having two names.
Or the dynamics shifting massively when a group goes from 150 to 160 people. We just don't naturally think that way. And we constantly commit that fundamental attribution, error, blaming character while ignoring the immense power of the situation.
But the hopeful message is that we can understand these dynamics better.
Absolutely. Success in creating positive social epidemics or stopping negative ones often comes from testing our intuitions, not just relying on them.
Like Sesame Street, using the distractor device to see what really held kids' attention.
Or Wonder Man testing his silly gold box idea and finding it worked brilliantly. Or researchers digging into the Kitty Genevieve's case to understand the real contextual factors at play.
We have to accept that human communication has its own unusual, sometimes counterintuitive rules.
We do. And by understanding those rules, by understanding how to reach the right few, how to make a message truly stick, and how to leverage the power of context, including group size, we can potentially make a huge difference.
This raises an important question, and that question really is for you, the listener. As you go about your day, think about a common issue or maybe a trend in your own life or perhaps your work or your community.
Yeah, maybe it's a new initiative at the office that just isn't quite taking off like you hoped. Or a local problem in your neighborhood that seems completely stuck. Or even a personal habit you're trying to change in yourself or encourage in your family.
How might one or more of these tipping point principles, those unique individuals, the few, the way the message itself is crafted, stickiness, or the subtle influence of the environment and group dynamics, context from the rule of 150, how might those be quietly at play, shaping its course?
Is there a connector you need to reach? Is the message not sticky enough, not practical or memorable?
Yeah.
Is the environment or the group context working against the change you want to see?
What small, maybe counterintuitive push might exist? That little tweak, that Band-Aid applied in just the right place, that could potentially shift things dramatically.
It's worth thinking about how you might apply some of these insights, how you could leverage these subtle but powerful forces that can sometimes make a monumental difference.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the tipping point.
Until next time, keep observing, keep questioning, and keep an eye out for those subtle shifts, the ones that might just lead to big changes.